Hello and welcome. My name is Vlad Bogan and I'm the CEO of Chromos Pharma. Thank you for attending our webinar that we gave a rather candid title, Your Trial Post-COVID Recovery Must Start Now. Sponsors frequently ask Chromos to join when things need improvement, and in the last couple of months we have been receiving a lot of requests from those trying to navigate in this unprecedented environment. After doing a lot of predictive modeling on how to optimize their clinical trials post-pandemic, we thought it would be a good idea to share our vision with you. So before we dive in, let me briefly introduce you to our speakers. Jason Rubin is the Director of Clinical Operations at MKR Clinical Research Consultants. MKR is our long-standing collaborator in North America and helps us with our trial management. Jason has 15+ years of industry experience at the sponsor and CRO levels across numerous therapeutic areas. He heads up a geographically dispersed team and contributes heavily toward MKR's operational excellence. In addition, Jason provides a lead role in clinical management, working with managers and vendors within the industry to meet thetheir needs for staffing solutions. He holds bachelor's and master's degrees in nutritional science. Zsolt Kostis is a clinical research professional with 12+ years of experience in numerous therapeutic areas. Before joining Chromos Pharma, he worked at both sponsor companies and the CROs. Currently he's heading the Hungarian office of Chromos Pharma and contributes heavily to the Central European operations of the company. He is a medical doctor and has an MBA degree. Vladimir Krechikov is the head of Eastern European region and is responsible for all Chromos Pharma's operations therein. He started his career in clinical research as an investigator, then worked at various positions in business development and clinical operations, regional and global CROs, before transitioning to Chromos Pharma as a director of business development position 10 years ago. He's a physician and has a PhD in clinical pharmacology. He's an author of over 30 scientific publications and peer-reviewed journals. And last but not least is Stephanie Finnegan, COO of Chromos Pharma. Stephanie is responsible for global operations spanning North America, Europe, and Asia. She has 30 years of experience in drug development, ranging from M&A and portfolio management to manufacturing and clinical research. She founded her first company, which was the first U.S. contract manufacturer specializing in recombinant proteins and monoclonal antibodies. In the last 15 years, she has been working as a leader in CRO organizations. She has BS in mathematics, as well as an MBA and CPA degrees. So before I pass the mic to Stephanie, who will dive into our case study, I just wanted to mention one housekeeping item. If while listening to our speakers, you come up with a question, please write it in the question, not the comment, but question line, and it will come directly to us. At the end of the webinar, we will try and address all of the questions in block. And now I give you Chromos Pharma's COO, Stephanie Finnegan.
Thank you, Vlad. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. As Vlad has stated, the key drivers for any sponsor, assuming data integrity and quality, of course, are budget and timeline. And when the COVID-19 pandemic first hit, we spent quite a lot of time, as Vlad stated, in doing some sensitivity analysis and what-if scenarios around how to, mitigate any delays that this may have caused. Our observations from this analysis were so interesting that we decided to do this webinar to share it with everyone. And so let me just set the stage. Our core study around which we've created the sensitivity that we're going to present today is what we call, an easy, right? There's no easy clinical trial, but a fairly simple pivotal phase 3 in a non-life-threatening disease, which is psoriasis. It's a problem, but it's not life-threatening. Fairly easy to enroll, and so we stuck to sort of the Western venues with our initial scenario, because we anticipated no problems with enrollment. So if I could just transition over here to the next slide and have a little more granularity. So it's a fairly large study, 600 patients, even more to have it randomized, as you can see on the charts here. But we started with UK, Germany, Spain, Australia, and USA because we're aiming for FDA approval. Ultimately, we want to aim, the sponsor wants to aim for UK as well as EMA. So this is where we started. This is the timeline. Again, you can see plain vanilla, perfect study, right? 5-6 months of startup, 18 months of enrollment in the earliest starting venues, very short treatment period, easy closeout, easy report to write, no problems. Right, it's great. When you say no problems, that's bad luck. But the base case study came out looking like this. And to orient you to this graph here, which those of you with, that love math, it's second nature, right? But it isn't second nature for everyone to see that, the base case is a 25-month study, and the budget, we're not using dollars or euros or any budget here, but just sort of a base case, 100% is the index, right, of the base case scenario, and everything else goes up and down from there. So just remember this, try to remember that it's a 25-month study, because we're now going to switch to a different orientation on the chart, which is a short period of 22 to 34 months, and index of cost from 70%, right, like we would ever see a study come in 70% below budget, but anyway, to 150% over budget. So if you can orient yourself to this, the rest of the presentation is going to show you in sort of bubble form, like the blue bubble, the results of the rest of our analyses. So again, this is the reorientation of the chart. This is where we start. Try to envision, though, in your mind that this base case budget, this study finishes at month 26, but we're not at month 26. We're sort of back around month 10 right now. And in month 10, COVID hits, right? So envision COVID hits, and what happens to our budget? Well, we don't even know, but we're thinking as we run our sensitivity, even before we really started to figure out what COVID was doing to the world, right? We knew that we were, socially distanced. We were shut down. Our sites were not seeing our CRAs at all. And so we have a COVID hitting, and it hit about month 10, which is March, right, of this year. And it created a huge delay because of the shutdown, because of the slowdown, because patients couldn't enroll, because some of our sites converted to COVID-19 treatment centers. And for all of these reasons, we incurred about an overall 7-month delay in the study. So if you look at the blue bubble here, which is the base case, and look at now at the orange bubble, this is what happens post, I won't say post-COVID because we're not post-COVID yet, and we won't be for some time to come, but post-shutdown, our new budget now looks like it's extended about 7 months, and our timeline 7 months, and our new budget is about 10–15% over budget. So what do? Well, we want to show you today what the analysis that we went through to configure what were some of the remediation efforts that could take place. Because remember, during COVID, we've all experienced this. Monitors can't get on site. Sites go away, patients drop out because they can't be treated per protocol. All these things happen, and these result in the delay. So the next few presenters are going to take you through the iteration of our various scenarios and show you what we try to do to mitigate the timeline and the budget, and then ultimately leading to what we found was the best solution. So let me introduce our next speaker, is Jason Rubine, as Vlad has already introduced. Jason will take you through our first attempt at mitigation.
Hi all. So thank you for the introduction, Stephanie and Vlad. So now that we are in what we're calling a post-COVID world, the first thing we have to do is how do we reopen up? So some of the questions you may be having is how do we optimize doctor-patient care? How do we minimize the spread and ensure staff and patients are safe? Well, some of the ways this can be performed is through the utilization of phone screening visits, telemedicine and patient portals, as well as online self-assessment tools. Another option is the use of doing a triage protocol or survey to ensure that the patients have not been in a recent hotspot and are safe to come into your facility. Things that can be performed on behalf of the site are implementing a safety protocol. This will limit the staff exposure and ensure sanitary work environments for all employees. the amount of time a subject is in the facility or site. If you limit their time in the facility to what is only needed, you can minimize potential exposure. And for example, a virtual queue. Also, unnecessary interactions between staff and patients. This is performed by streamlining all site procedures. Until recently, a patient may interact with multiple site staff personnel, from a receptionist to multiple nurses to ultimately the doctor. The amount of face-to-face interactions should try to be limited. For example, you can utilize telephone check-ins. So if possible, there should be a one-to-one patient-to-staff interaction at any given time. On behalf of the patient, the site can implement safety protocols. You should inform the subject of any new changes and inform them of any new expectations or safety procedures that are put in place. This could incorporate but not be limited to the utilization of face masks, tissues, practice proper hand washing, and disposing of any contaminated protective equipment. Performing all of these tasks should create a positive office environment for all patients in these uncertain times. Because as we all know from research, the best form of advertising will be the word of mouth from your subjects sharing the positive work experiences they had at your location. So how does this relate to the trial we're talking about? In this trial, as Stephanie mentioned, we had 58 sites across the US, Spain, Germany, UK, and Australia. If we change nothing with the COVID cost, there will be over a 15% increase in cost, and timelines will increase roughly 8 months in length. So one option is noted as the yellow bubble. By adding 30 sites in the existing countries, it will increase cost by over 20%. And as a result, the study timelines will be shortened by 2 months. So going from 58 to 88 sites, clearly though, they're spending the 20% more in budget is only saving 2 months. It's not necessarily a great or an ideal situation. So now to talk about other potential mitigation, I'm going to pass it on to Zsolt.
Thank you, Jason. Let me drive it to our mitigation modeling to the Central European region. What we have found that, yes, historically we have fast and reliable patient recruitment here. We have access to the patient pool which is required for this trial, but at the same time also we have a very busy area in this, so we have several ongoing trials already. All in all, the motivated and experienced investigators and the high standard of medical care are in support of doing rescue in our operations here. The costs, I would say, overall competitive, obviously less than the US, maybe a bit more than for Eastern countries. We have reasonable regulatory approval and startup timelines that are also supporting such rescue operations. And we have seen that the study is already running in EU countries, which means that extending this project into other maybe less expensive, like Central European countries, looks reasonable. Since we have these modern hospital and diagnostics equipments available, we have centralized healthcare systems where the patients can be found. And also the doctors have excellent English language skills, and also the study monitors overall have a high percentage MDs, PharmDs who can support these trials very well. Related to the COVID-19 pandemic situation in the Central European region, we can say that these countries actually acted faster maybe than other parts of the world, and so we see that we are a bit ahead of the pandemic curve, meaning that the recovery here in these countries may be a couple of months earlier than in other parts of the globe. And we have also seen some advances, actually, not only the drawbacks, because the authorities are now even more communicative and supportive with us, not only in the COVID studies, but also the non-COVID trials are getting approval, and these are in favor to start regulatory activities as soon as possible in order to have approval by the time it is done and the contracting, the studies can run up. On the other side, several studies have been put on hold. Enrollment have been put on hold. This is of course a risk that those studies will restart. But again, the timelines is key here. If we start early the mitigation, we will get to a more positive outcome. So we found that we can do significant mitigation here, but we have not stopped here, but we went to our other key countries, and this is the point where I will hand over to my colleague Vladimir Krechikov, head of Eastern European region at Kronos Pharma. Vladimir, please take the floor.
Okay, thanks, Harold. And now let's have a closer look how the countries in Eastern Europe and CIS can help us to mitigate this study and help us with enrollment. And the first advantage of this region is centralized healthcare system with sites with high concentration of patients. So you don't need to run across the study across the country to find few sites with 1, 2, or 3 patients in it. Just go to centralized sites with 10 to 20 psoriatic patients and get them in the study. And this allows us to get very, very fast enrollment. And this has been already proven in previous psoriasis studies in the region. And we're quite confident that adding countries from CIS and Eastern Europe can speed up and enrollment in the study we are discussing. Of course, faster enrollment is a great thing, but also the quality is matters. And you know, we quite often receive questions from our clients. So if the data from Eastern Europe and CIS is acceptable for IND studies, and the answer, of course, is yes. And the quality of data have been confirmed in many FDA and EMA inspections that were held in the region. Another very important point, especially for dermatology studies and for psoriatic studies, and also for studies with biologics and biosimilars, that a lot of patients in the population are treatment naive and ready to join the study and have very, very high adherence to the protocol, because for them, in many cases, to receive treatment for psoriasis is the only chance, to get the only chance to get the treatment within the trial. That's why they still try to adhere to the protocol and do not lose that follow-up. And in general, you need slightly less randomized patients to have the same number of completed patients for the study analysis. And another good point, which already was mentioned by Joel, that in the region, investigators are quite motivated and experienced, and the costs are very competitive comparing to European Union and especially comparing to US. And of course, when we are talking about rescue study or extending ongoing study, startup timelines really matters. And in the region, in the Eastern Europe and CIS, study startup timeline is quite reasonable for such type of the study. So taking all the above, so we decided to add 40 sites with 200 patients from Eastern Europe and CIS into our modeling. And so let's have a look what happens in the model when we added these sites and these patients. So Stephanie, please take the floor.
Sorry, I started talking. I was on mute. So sorry. So thank you for passing this back. This is my favorite part, to talk about the bubble chart. And as you can see, as Jason left off with the unacceptable yellow bubble, let's figure out that we did this analysis, and so we didn't pursue Jason's strategy. Thank you, Jason, for advising us. But we pursued instead the strategy set forth by our Central and Eastern and post-Soviet venue CIS guys, and we were able to add, as Vladimir just said, 200 patients in about 40 sites. So if you remember back to the yellow, we added actually more sites for this solution than we did in our yellow, somewhat unacceptable solution. But what we gained from this is by adding high recruiting and very sort of fast recruiting sites that also have a very, very much lower cost per patient due to lower billing rates for CRO services in these regions, and also, of course, due to the lower cost average per patient in these venues. we were able to do two things. We were able to recover the 7 months that we lost due to the COVID delays. So if you look at the green is the result of our major and final, mitigation solution. We recovered those months, which means we recovered CRO service fees that you don't spend when you've delayed the study by 7 months. But miraculously, we also were able to almost get back to our original budget, only exceeding it by 6% by virtue of these cost savings that we did effect by basically substituting a third of our patients with patients from the lower cost venues. So our takeaway here is if you have, next time we have a pandemic, I'm sure we'll have the foresight to provide these solutions in advance, but we can always learn these lessons because who knows, what the post-COVID world's going to look like. We don't know yet, but these solutions are effective now, and they'll be effective for solving almost any mitigation that you need for a study. So I'll now pass the baton over back to Vlad to wrap up and give us the takeaways.
Thank you, Stephanie. So it is impossible to fully assess the effect of COVID on clinical research at the moment, as you already mentioned. And while it has already triggered a small revolution in bringing virtual clinical trials to the mainstream, I think the brick and mortar research will have a long convalescent period. If the virus doesn't return, our realistic prediction is around 12 months for things to return to status quo, if ever, as the slide suggests. One of the reasons that we've selected a dermatology trial is because the trials for non-critical diseases will be affected the most, we believe. Physicians will be rebuilding their practices and patients will be trying to receive the most care with the least face-to-face interactions. Despite of the above, we expect a significant surge in clinical monitoring activity in all of our venues in the coming months. All of the ongoing clinical trials have accumulated an unprecedented backlog, and within the next few months, accessing those sites and investigators is going to be very, very challenging. There will be significant congestion, so we want you to keep this in mind as well. And while we may be biased in our predilection for Central and Eastern Europe, we're also trying to be realistic. As we have demonstrated in our case study, the only way to get to the so-called old normal results in the new normal world is to aggressively expand the geography and the number of sites. Clearly, if you can convert some of the activities from the on-site to virtual, from on-site monitoring to remote, we strongly encourage you to do so. Candidly, we ourselves have found this to be exceptionally challenging in the ongoing trials. Clearly, for the new trials, this may be quite different, but in the trials that we have to remedy and rescue right now, this is not always an option. While no one can predict how clinical research and drug development will look in 2020, for the reasons that we have mentioned above, we believe that we're entering a period of transient burst of activities, hunt for eligible patients and eligible sites. And clearly one size doesn't fit all, but we suggest that in order to salvage most of clinical problems, one should think outside the box and really act swiftly. So with this, I would like to move on to questions and answers. There's several that came in. Let me start, and I tried to kind of move them to different presenters. So we have a question from Oana. In terms of CTAs in EU countries, did you go via VHP at study start? If yes, did this facilitate CTAs in Hungary, etc.? And Oana put this in our chat side of things, but we were able to gather that as well. So Zsolt, maybe you can jump in and quickly answer this question.
Yes, actually it is not an easy question because actually if the study started under VHP, obviously our goal is to continue VHP. Most of the documents are already approved by the authorities and we just need to focus on the country specifics, more like So in this setting, I would say, yes, we will definitely go with VHP. Otherwise, in new trials, VHP can be cumbersome. So, but in this case, I would go with VHP, yes.
All right. Well, thank you, Zsolt, and I hope you are satisfied with the answer. Question for Jason. You mentioned a virtual queue. What do you mean by that? How would you implement that? Jason, please take away.
Okay, well, a virtual queue, what can happen is the subject, when they get to the doctor's office, they can call in and let the doctor's office know, let the receptionist know that they're sitting in the parking lot, and you put them in like you would normally check in at your doctor's office. So write their name down. And then what happens is you would tell your subject to wait in the car until you're called back for your turn. And what this does is this eliminates the need to have multiple subjects and upwards of 10 or 20 sitting in close quarters in a waiting room, when they can sit isolated in their vehicle with their caregiver or by themselves. And then when their time would normally come up, you would just either text them or call them, and they are into your facility within a few seconds. And that is an easy way to limit exposure to everybody involved.
Thank you, Jason. Actually, I've personally experienced this recently as a physician. I've been, you know, I had to be screened for COVID, and this is exactly how they have done this with screening for you know, for the virus. So absolutely a great idea. Next question is for Vladimir Krechikov. Somebody's asking, or actually stating, I've heard that Russia is at its peak of the COVID crisis. Is this true?
And yes and no. On the one hand, we have a lot of patients every day, adding to the statistics every day, but now we definitely see that number of patients decreases from day to day, and according to official statistics, we are on the slope which is going down, so the peak is behind us.
Okay, and then there's one more for you. Based on our experience, the investigator fees are about the same in your countries and in the EU, but you mentioned that your costs are lower. Please clarify.
Okay, thanks for the question. When we talk about study costs, we should talk about per patient cost, and these costs include investigators' fee, CRA's fee, some project management, study coordination within the country, logistic, and etc. And if we take all these costs together in these terms, their patient fee is significantly lower in Eastern Europe and CIS countries comparing to European Union and comparing to US.
Thank you, Vladimir. Zsolt, question for you. You mentioned that Central European countries, as they restart operations of the studies that have been put on hold or temporarily stopped, will the sites have capacity for new trials?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we have also evaluated this part critically because, you know, with the restart, the sites will be overloaded. Obviously, they have very big backlog, and so monitors could not go for months to the site. But what we see actually that the sites are still responsive. Less sites are transferred to COVID, and we think that the overall impact of this will be less than maybe at other countries. So we need to think about this in comparison to maybe other options that could come up. So, but we are positive in that.
Okay. And Stephanie, question for you. If your Central, Eastern, and CIS venues are so effective or so cost effective, sorry, why do you not include them in the original base case scenario?
Well, normally we make recommendations to our sponsors about the venues that we would suggest for a given study based upon the parameters of the study. But it's always the sponsor's final decision. And in this particular case, this sponsor was very much driven by their marketing department, and because they wanted to market the drug ultimately in UK and EU and US and everywhere they can, they believed in the marketing that they should spread the sites around in the venues where they ultimately want to market the product. And that's a very common view among sponsors. If we had been given the choice to optimize timelines and budget, of course we would have included some of our Central and Eastern European and post-Soviet CIS venues from the start. But we're always available to follow what the sponsor's requests are or to optimize according to budget, timeline, and other reasons.
All right. Well, this concludes the questions and concludes our presentation. We hope that everyone has found it useful. We are still open for additional questions, and you know how to get a hold of us. So if something comes up in the next day, two, or at any time, please reach back out to us. We'll be happy to discuss this particular study scenario or any other requests that you may have. And again, we thank you for finding time to join this modeling session. So thank you, and be safe and have a wonderful rest of your day and a great weekend.